Hey guys, welcome to the follow-up to qualifying candidates. In this video, I'm going to be responding to some of the feedback I received in response to that video. With that in mind, if you have not seen that video or would like to revisit it, I will put the link to that right up here and in the description.
Why did you cross my name off of your wall?
Because you became a mother.
For what it's worth, Jacob revealing his elimination of Kate was for this reason. Gives us an answer to the question of which Kwon candidate number 42 was referring to. If Sun were ever a candidate, and I think she probably was, then according to Jacob's revelation, she would have been eliminated after the birth of Ji-Yun, meaning the Kwon associated with 42 was almost certainly referring to Jin. The first comment that I want to address comes from first name, last name 816. I believe Sun and Jin were both candidates, meant to protect the island together if chosen. They were, after all, the package. So I do have to say that this does seem like a very popular idea. It seems to me that this is largely because of people's fondness for their relationship, as well as the fact that they were touched by Jacob simultaneously. But I do have a few problems with that idea, none of which I've ever really seen addressed by people that have brought up this idea. One of which is Jacob's explanation for why Kate was eliminated as a candidate. He makes it pretty clear that her name was crossed out because she became a mother. And as we know, Sun also became a mother at around the same time. So as I say in this video, if Kwon were referring to Sun, then it too should have been crossed out the way Austin was. Now, I suppose if Kwon did originally refer to Jin and Sun, then maybe, in theory, that would mean that Kwon wouldn't get crossed out, because maybe at this point it referred to just Jin. Again, I'm not really sure how most people that subscribe to this idea, I'm not quite sure what their explanation for what Kwon means at that point is. But the other big issue that I have with this idea is what Jacob says when he explains why he chose the people that he did.
I chose you because you were like me. You were all alone.
And this statement actually really did apply to Sun and Jin by the time they arrived on the island. Because by that point, even though they had been traveling together as opposed to a lot of the other survivors who were traveling alone, they had become so distant and disconnected in their relationship that they really were just as alone as anybody else. Sun and Jin, as individuals and as a couple, needed the island as much as it needed them.
I chose you because you needed this place as much as it needed you.
So with all of that in mind, I do agree that they were almost certainly both candidates, but I disagree that they ever shared a candidate number, or that Jacob ever envisioned them as being a package deal when it came to potentially replacing him. While it's pretty clear the Man in Black is typically unable to inflict fatal wounds on candidates, what is less clear is to what degree he can physically affect them.
Ow.
The scene between him and Locke in the donkey wheel chamber seems to suggest he is not able to physically compel John's actions at all.
Could you help me up? No. Sorry, I can't.
And yet, in the Season 1 finale, he is clearly capable of dragging Locke through the jungle while in his smoke form. This apparent contradiction may mean there was actually a different reason behind his inability to help Locke to his feet in the underground chamber. This next comment comes from Shadow Dog Production, who says, "Not really pushing back on your contention that the Man in Black can't touch the candidates, just a gut feeling I had while watching his scene with Locke you referenced. There's this little smirk the Man in Black gets when he refuses to help Locke, like he's enjoying Locke's pain. a sadistic smirk. I have no proof of this, but every time I watch this scene, I think, you could help him if you wanted to, you sadistic prick. So first of all, I want to clarify that it's not really my contention that the Man in Black can't touch the candidates. In fact, by the time I got to the Clouded Judgment video, I had reached the conclusion that it's kind of undeniable that the Man in Black can touch the candidates. The best example is where the monster drags Locke through the jungle and tries to take him down into the tunnels. Another example that seems to be confirmed is when the monster takes the form of one of the Medusa spiders and bites Nikki. So it does seem evident that the monster can physically influence the candidates, but he's not able to do lethal harm to them. Now that said, I do think the scene between Christian and Locke in the donkey wheel chamber, it does seem to me in that specific circumstance that the Man in Black is not able to help John, which raises an interesting question for why that might be. One potential explanation is the one put forth by Shadow Dog Production, in that the Man in Black technically could have helped Locke, but he's just sadistic or cruel enough to make Locke get up on his own, even though he could help him. And while I don't hate that interpretation, I actually don't really get the sense that that's what's happening. If you look at the exact moment that Christian says that he can't help Locke, it does almost seem like he regrets it. In fact, I really don't see the sadistic smirk that Shadow Dog Production references. Not in that moment, anyways.
No. Sorry, I can't.
So while I still think that that is a valid interpretation of what's going on in that scene, I don't think it's quite so heavily suggested. As for what I think may have been happening here, I think I gave this explanation in the very next video that I did, which was called State of Mind. In that video, I put forth the idea that the electromagnetic interference caused by the proximity to these larger concentrations of the island's energy may affect the Man in Black's ability to be physically present in these locations, or at least his ability to be physically influential. The evidence that I point to with that is the fact that once the Man in Black has access to the source in the series finale, he does not go down into that cave himself to shut off the light. He still needs Desmond to be the one to do that. This, to me, implies that the source must have some kind of negative effect on the Man in Black's ability to operate near this larger pocket of electromagnetic energy. What's important for now is that the degree to which the Man in Black can physically affect those under Jacob's protection may fluctuate somewhat. But does that also mean there might be circumstances in which he can even go so far as actually killing these protected individuals? Well, I would argue there is one specific condition in which he can. Consider what happens to Bram and his companions. They were sent to the island by Jacob on a mission specifically designed to hinder the Man in Black's efforts. Leaving them entirely unprotected would make them vulnerable to being immediately killed by the Man in Black, and therefore defeat the purpose of sending them on the mission in the first place. And yet, as we know, he was able to kill them. But I believe he was only able to do so once they tried to kill him.
You're free.
Kill him! Spread out! Get him!
In this channel's A Shining Force video, I used an analogy comparing the island's electromagnetic field to a network, and the smoke monster to a program that operates within that network. And because Jacob has become an expert wielder of the island's energy, He is able to place certain restrictions on what this program can do. I believe these restrictions placed on the Man in Black by his brother prevent him from outright murdering these protected individuals, but not from killing them in response to their attack of him.
What's on your mind, James?
Wondering what would happen to you if I put a bullet in your head.
Why don't we find out?
Don't shoot him! Don't shoot him!
The next comment that I want to address comes from Time Gentleman, who says, "This will likely get covered in an upcoming video, but does Kate dropping dynamite down the tunnel when the Man in Black is pulling Locke into it count as her attacking the Man in Black? If not, why not? If so, why doesn't he take this opportunity to kill her, and possibly Jack, Hurley, and even Locke, depending on the rules? Is it to preserve Locke's faith in him, which may be lost if he watched the Man in Black tear his friends apart in front of him, and thereby lose the Man in Black a valuable chess piece? Or is it because he's sufficiently weakened / discombobulated by the explosion going off so near to, or even within him, that he is forced to retreat, and by the time he would have had enough strength to come back and kill Kate, her attack on him would have been too long ago to still allow it?" So I believe I did eventually kind of go into this in the Clouded Judgment video. But yes, when watching this scene and what the monster does after the dynamite goes off, it does appear to me that he is genuinely disoriented by this explosion. And given that this detonation does appear to have occurred within his swirling particles / consciousness, it makes a lot of sense that he would be temporarily disoriented and need to kind of retreat and recover from that. And yes, as Time Gentleman says, I think by the time that he would have recovered, then it would no longer really count as self-defense to kill Kate. As for whether or not it would have killed Kate if it hadn't been disoriented, based on how this may or may not have ended up alienating Locke, I suspect he would have gone ahead and killed her. I imagine Locke would have convinced himself that it was just defending itself. We know that he had no problem explaining away why it was attacking him. Furthermore, I think that this would have thrown even more fuel on the fire of the conflict between Jack and Locke, which I absolutely believe the Man in Black stokes throughout the series in order to generate conflict. And I think Kate's death would have certainly contributed to that significantly. Plus, as I say in the Clouded Judgment video, I really do think that what the monster was trying to accomplish through that sequence was one or two candidates getting killed by the detonation of the dynamite. And while I think he would have been okay with Jack being one of the ones that got killed, I think ideally he would have liked to keep Jack and Locke alive a bit longer, again, to kind of milk conflict from that dynamic. Which means I think Kate and Hurley were really the ones that he ideally would have liked to see killed, especially Hurley, because as I talked about in one of my more recent videos, Hurley is really good at relieving the tensions of the 815ers, which in a lot of ways kind of makes him the worst enemy of the Man in Black. The Man in Black's whole MO is that he wants to generate conflict that gets candidates killed. And Hurley is a really big threat to that agenda. Indeed, this loophole of sorts seems crucial to Dogen's final attempt at getting Sayid killed. He sends Sayid into the jungle with instructions to stab the Man in Black in the chest the instant he sees him. What Dogen was apparently hoping for here is that the Man in Black would leap at this chance to kill a candidate before realizing Sayid had been infected. Unfortunately for Dogen, the Man in Black is not so impulsive. For anyone that doubts this is what Dogen intended, consider that upon seeing Sayid return alive, his immediate conclusion is not that Sayid succeeded in killing the Man in Black, but that he did not make the attempt. What I was failing to remember when I made this video was the fact that Dogen was actually present out in the courtyard when Sayid first returns and delivers the Man in Black's message.
What happened?
The way I had been remembering it was that Sayid delivered that message, Dogen was not present for that, and then Sayid went into the Temple Spring area and found Dogen. And that was the first time Dogen was seeing him. And yeah, obviously that was incorrect. The rest of my reasoning I absolutely stand by, and I think on its own shows us that this is what Dogen intended. That reasoning being that when Sayid says, oh, no, I did stab him and I only let him talk to me after that didn't work. If Dogen truly believed that it should have worked, then he should have been confused by this and he should have had follow-up questions, which he does not. And then when Sayid accuses Dogen of trying to get someone else to kill him for Dogen, Dogen does not refute this at all.
You let him talk to you.
I stabbed him in the chest like you told me to. Then I let him talk to me. That's twice you've tried to have someone else kill me. You had the opportunity to do it yourself. Why didn't you?
Now, there was another video where I talked about the dagger situation and I made the same mistake of misremembering Dogen being present in the courtyard. This was in my follow-up video to the Underworld video essay. And in case anybody's interested in the full extent of my thoughts on this issue, I'm going to go ahead and edit in my full discussion of that, which was very much tied up in my thoughts on whether or not Mother was a smoke monster. So yeah, I'll go ahead and put that in here, because I am very much aware that it is an incredibly popular theory that Mother herself was a smoke monster. I think it's fair to say that most people I've ever talked to about this subject subscribe to that theory. That said, I am not one of them. And the main reason for that is the fact that she was killed by the dagger. Which, me saying that, of course, means I should probably explain my thoughts on that whole situation. Because I am also aware that the subject of the dagger is very much something that is somewhat heavily debated. In the Season 6 episode Sundown, when we, the audience, see the dagger for the first time, it's when Dogen is handing it to Sayid and telling him that he needs to go out and stab the Man in Black before he says anything.
I want you to kill him. He will come to you as someone you know, someone who has died. As soon as you see him, plunge this deep into his chest. If you allow him to speak, it is already too late.
Sayid does then go out and stab the Man in Black in the chest. And nothing happens.
Hello, Sayid.
And a lot of people think that is because the Man in Black got out the words, "Hello, Sayid." In other words, he spoke to Sayid, and a lot of viewers think that is why the knife didn't work. A lot of these same people who also think that Mother was a smoke monster as well think that the dagger worked on her because she didn't speak to the man in black before he stabbed her. But I strongly disagree with the notion that a character speaking has anything to do with how vulnerable they are or are not to being stabbed. For one, what even counts? Sure, Mother didn't speak to the man in black in the moments leading up to her being stabbed, but she did speak to him the day before. So what amount of time would have had to have passed between her speaking to him and the point at which she would then be vulnerable to being stabbed again? Next, we have the example where the man in black says essentially the same thing to Richard about Jacob when handing him the dagger. He tells Richard that he needs to stab Jacob before he has time to speak to Richard. Otherwise, it will be too late.
Put this through his chest. Do not hesitate. Do not let him say a word. If he speaks, it will already be too late.
But in Jacob's case, we know that he would be vulnerable to the knife regardless of whether or not he speaks to Richard before he gets stabbed. We know that he's flesh and blood, and more importantly, we know that when Jacob does eventually get stabbed to death by Ben, Jacob spoke to him a fair amount before he was successfully murdered by Ben's knife. Well, Locke's knife, but at Ben's hand. So in that case, where the man in black tells Richard to stab Jacob before he can speak, we know in that situation, the man in black is not being literal. He just wants Richard to stab him before Jacob has time to talk Richard out of stabbing him.
If he speaks, it will already be too late. He can be very persuasive.
How can I kill him with this? He's black smoke.
No. I am.
And that is exactly what I think Dogen means when he tells Sayid essentially the same thing. And I feel like I can reasonably prove that. When Sayid returns to the temple after failing to kill the man in black, Dogen's reaction to no other information besides the fact that Sayid is back is to conclude that Sayid let the man in black talk to him.
You let him talk to you.
Sayid then clarifies,
I stabbed him in the chest like you told me to. Then I let him talk to me.
It's at this point that Sayid drops the dagger and says,
That's twice you've tried to have someone else kill me. You had the opportunity to do it yourself. Why didn't you?
And so at this point, Dogen is completely unaware that the man in black said even one word to Sayid before Sayid stabbed him. And he does not deny what Sayid is accusing him of.
That's twice you've tried to have someone else kill me. You had the opportunity to do it yourself. Why didn't you?
I was a businessman once.
If what Dogen had told Sayid was true, that Sayid was capable of killing the man in black if he stabbed him before the man in black had a chance to speak, then the first difference in how we see this scene play out would be that when Dogen sees Sayid return, he would have asked what happened instead of automatically jumping to, you let him talk to you. At which point, Sayid would have said the same thing about how he stabbed the man in black in the chest, like he was told to, but nothing happened, and then he let the man in black talk to him. At which point, Dogen would either have then been baffled as to why it didn't work, or he would have had the follow-up question of, well, did he say anything to you before you stabbed him? And if that point Sayid still got around to accusing Dogen of sending him out there to be killed by the man in black, Dogen would have denied this. But obviously none of that happens, which brings me to what I see as the inescapable conclusion that what Sayid is accusing Dogen of is true. Dogen wanted Sayid to attack the Man in Black so that the Man in Black would kill Sayid instead of then being able to use this man that is now infected. So finally getting back to the actual point, I absolutely think that people take what is said about the dagger and letting people speak, I think they take that too literally. In both cases where some version of that line is said, Dogen to Sayid and the Man in Black to Richard, each speaker knows that the person they're sending off is likely to be talked out of what they're being sent to do by their target. And that is why in both cases they are saying, don't let him speak to you. If you do, it will be too late. So as I see it, the reason the Man in Black could not be killed with a dagger was because he was not flesh and blood. And therefore, the reason Mother could be killed with a dagger is because she was. Now, the follow-up question that I usually get when I tell people that I don't think Mother was a smoke monster is how then did she manage to slaughter the village and fill in the well overnight? And my answer is that both telekinesis and pyrokinesis are two of the parapsychological abilities that special people are shown to be able to manifest in Lost. And these abilities alone would be enough for Mother to massacre the village and fill in the well. Now, sometimes I do get pushback on that from people that question if those abilities actually are shown in the show. I think the best example of pyrokinesis is probably what happens with Ben's torch when he's in the tunnels underneath the temple visiting the monster. The flame goes out just before the monster emerges, and then reignites once it retreats back into the altar.
Daddy?
It feels like a reasonable assumption that the Man in Black is the one that was doing this to the fire. As for telekinesis, the one that I feel like is the most glaring example is when the Man in Black releases Ben from his leg restraint in the episode Dr. Linus.
I can't think of a better man for the job.
Well, it doesn't seem very likely, does it, under the circumstances? How am I going to get away from...
Now, some people have challenged that by saying that what actually happened there was the Man in Black was manipulating the electromagnetic energy to control the metal, which is fair. But setting aside the fact that metal manipulation would be virtually just as useful in massacring the village as telekinesis would be, I actually think there's another pretty good example of telekinesis, and that is all of the objects flying around the cabin in The Man Behind the Curtain.
I heard you. You said...
This, to me, is once again the Man in Black demonstrating that ability. Now, I think aside from the Man in Black, Mother is probably the most powerful person we see in regards to her harnessing the island's electromagnetic energy and manifesting it in parapsychological ways. So it is completely believable to me that she would also have those two abilities. Now, there is one more counterpoint that I want to address that people often refer to against the idea that Mother wasn't a smoke monster. And that is what she says to Jacob about what would happen if he went down into the cave.
Just promise me, no matter what you do, you won't ever go down there.
Would I die?
You'd be worse than dying, Jacob. Much worse.
People point to this as her demonstrating her knowledge of what would become of someone that ended up down in the light. And I do agree that she is demonstrating that knowledge. But where I disagree is that she would only have that knowledge if it happened to her or if she witnessed it happen to someone else. Another one of the parapsychological abilities that is repeatedly demonstrated in the show is precognition. The Man in Black actually demonstrates that ability many times throughout the Across the Sea episode. When he's a kid, he just knows how to play Sinet.
What is it? It's a game. You play it. How do you know how? I just know.
And when he's building the wheel and telling Mother that once he turns it, it will transport him off island, she asks how he knows this, and he says because he's special.
How do you know all this? How do you know it will work?
I'm special.
Because he is uniquely capable of harnessing the island's energy, he has this ability of precognition. And I absolutely believe that Mother has this ability as well. And this is how I believe that she knows that going into the light will do something far worse than just killing you. She just knows things the way the Man in Black does. But all right, I think that's everything I have for this video. I hope you guys will come back for the next one. Oh, you're still here. Hopefully that means you enjoyed this video. If so, please consider sticking around and being a constant for this channel by clicking right up here to subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon if you would like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive. In the meantime, feel free to check out previous content from this channel by clicking here or here. Oh no. Please subscribe.